Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1296, Doom War. Sonny was not sure that he was buying what Anank believed. But at the same time, he couldn't completely discard it. Damn Weaver. Just why did the creator of the spell have to be a nebulous and elusive creature, not only surrounded in mystery, but also obsessed with lies? Could there be anyone more untrustworthy? Even though Sonny had inherited Weaver's forbidden lineage, wore Weaver's mask, and had a high affinity to fate, which was Weaver's domain, he still knew close to nothing about the demon of fate. Where had Weaver come from? Who hid behind the fearsome black mask? What motives had guided them? What goals had they pursued? He shook his head with resignation and looked at Anank, frowning. Whatever. If I can't learn about Weaver, I should at least learn everything else. Sonny collected his thoughts before asking the next question. Grandmother, you said that the purpose of the nightmare spell is to save the future from the doom of the great war between the demons and the gods. To be honest, I am not entirely sure what that really means. What exactly is that doom? What made the war so terrible? The old woman gazed at the flowing expanse of the great river, lingered for a moment, and sighed. It was indeed terrible. Of course, I have not experienced the horror of those days myself. What I do know was passed down to me from my elders, who had. Granted, they escaped the war before the end came, so even they didn't know how and why the true devastation happened. She paused to catch her breath, then continued in her creaky voice, no one really knows what resentment pushed the demons to rise against the gods. It happened soon after the demon of desire escaped her chains. The youngest among them, the demon of destiny, called upon his siblings to wage war against the heavens. 5 answered his call, and only the demon of fate refused. Anank moved the steering oar a little, her frail hand as dark as the polished wood. Many blamed the demons for everything terrible that happened. But, truly, things weren't going well long before their rebellion. Most of the gods had grown distant, and people quarreled with each other, forgetting the days when everything stood or cloudy eyes were distant, as if the old woman was imagining the wide world that she had never seen or known. She slowly shook her head. Together against the corruption. Humans fought against humans, and against other noble creatures. Followers of war burned the temples of shadow, and their empire spread, consuming many weaker realms. Her cloudy eyes were distant, as if the old woman was imagining the wide world that she had never seen or known. She slowly shook her head. So, maybe, the Great War was merely the result, and not the cause of the end. In any case, the 6 demons assembled vast armies and led them against the gods. What was different about that war? Was that they were not immediately defeated. After all, there were many lesser deities, but none of them were as feared as the demons, let alone if 6 of them united. Others joined their cause, and even the great gods couldn't defeat such an enemy with ease. The old woman trembled. The war was furious and merciless. Many realms had become battlefields and were devoured by flames. But the worst was still to come. Because instead of coming to a conclusion, the war only continued to grow fiercer. Those loyal to the gods took up arms, and in response, the demons recruited more allies, mortal champions who had suffered the tyranny of the empire, ancient creatures that had been banished into the darkest corners of the underworld, and everyone else who bore deep grudges against the divine, even the harrowing Nephilim. Utter madness was unleashed, and soon, there was no place untouched by the war. Everywhere turned into the battlefield. Anank glanced at the flowing waters of the great river and remained silent for a while. Eventually, she said, nowhere was safe. The forests burned, the fields turned to deserts, the rivers dried up. A passing blow from the fighting deities could destroy entire cities. Over time, countless humans were displaced or lost their lives. That was when we started calling it the Doom War, believing that it would become the end of everything. It was also when Weaver created the nightmare spell, and gifted it to us mortals. Sonny suddenly remembered the forgotten shore, and the ruin that had befallen that land when the shining figure fell from the sky. Was that radiant creature one of the soldiers in the dreadful war between the 6 demons and the 6 gods? Was it, perhaps, one of the Nephilim? Or an actual angel? If what had happened on the forgotten shore was happening all across the dream realm, then it was no surprise that the ancient humans there saw it as the end of the world. Anank sighed. Weaver offered us a path to salvation, but Back then, the demon of fate was despised by all, the followers of the gods, the followers of the demons, and even those who did not want anything to do with the war. We, the priests of the nightmare spell, were despised as well. Few listened to us. Still, some did. The nightmare spell was alluring, after all, even in its infant state. Sonny tilted his head. Alluring. The old woman nodded. Of course. It gave its carriers so many abilities. The ability to possess memories and echoes, the ability to instantly be able to enter your soul, see, awaken your aspect, be guided on the path of ascension. The nightmare spell promised people who desperately wished for power means to defend themselves. So, Weaver was not only the most insidious demon, but also a devious salesman. The nightmare spell was packed with all kinds of boons that desperate people would find irresistible, boons that the humans of the waking world took for granted, since they had nothing to compare them to. No wonder the spell spread like a plague despite the contemptible reputation of its creator. So, what happened then? Anank lingered for a moment. The priests of the nightmare spell helped it spread, trying their best to bestow its gifts on new carriers. That was when my elders entered the tomb of Ariel. We never learned what happened after we left. The war must have turned even more harrowing, somehow, and neither side emerged victorious. Instead, everyone was destroyed. Even the gods perished. She hesitated. I heard that more outsiders appeared after the voices of the gods grew silent. Maybe they brought news to the tomb of Ariel. But by then, we were already chased far upstream, so we never met them. The old woman's voice grew wistful as she said, by now, most of them must have been consumed by the defilement. My lord. Perhaps you can learn more if you speak to Dusk of Fallen Grace. She is one of the Sibyls, after all. She must know more than a humble exile like me does. Chapter 1297, Where Nightmares Come From. Sonny remained silent for a while, thinking. There was a lot to think about. Although Neff's eyes were closed, he could tell that she was thoughtful, as well. The history of the dream realm, which they could only guess before, was revealed in front of them with stark clarity. Of course, Anank had not witnessed all these events herself. But the tales she relayed were passed down to her from people who actually had. No wonder. No wonder Mordred had told him that the knowledge and experience Awakened brought back from their nightmares were perhaps more important than the power and abilities they gained. And that legacy clans, especially those ruled by the sovereigns, were very particular about which seeds their science challenged. Both valor and song must have accumulated a great deal of knowledge. However, that knowledge was not something just anyone could access. Even Nephis, who had been adopted into the great clan, did not seem privy to most of their secrets yet. That was only natural. After all, knowledge was the origin of power. According to Weaver. And Anvil would not trust her with power until she had proven herself. He lingered for a few moments, then looked to his right, where Anank's mask still lay on the wooden deck. Stretching his hand, he picked it up and stared at the fearsome, demonic face. Sonny could not glimpse anything about the mask. He did not even know whether it was a memory or a simple piece of carved wood. Glancing at Anank, he pointed to the mask and asked, "Is this a divine memory?" She remained silent for a few moments, then slowly shook her head. "No, my lord. This one is merely sacred. A lesser facsimile of the true mask of Weaver. It is a part of the ceremonial garb that we, priests and priestesses of the nightmare spell, wear, both to escape the gaze of our pursuers and to follow in the footsteps of our benefactor, the demon of fate. The more accomplished a priest was, the higher rank memory they would be bestowed." Anank looked away with a faint smile. "My mother, whom I inherited this memory from, was one of the few who received a mask of the sacred rank, which was the highest of honors. As for divine memories of the mask of Weaver, I've never seen these holy relics. There were only ever 2 of them, entrusted personally to the first 2 who were chosen by the demon of fate, the high priest and the high priestess of the nightmare spell." Sonny studied the surface of the mask some more. After a short stretch of silence, he followed his whim and asked, "Does it have the 'Where is my eye?' enchantment?" He was curious if Anank, as the priestess of the spell, could teach him how to gaze at the tapestry of fate without dying. The old woman looked at him with a surprised expression. "Where is my eye? No, it doesn't. But, if I may be so bold as to ask, How do you know the name of that enchantment, my lord? This sacred memory of mine only possesses two. It was only the two holy masks that possessed a third, and even then, very few ever learned about it. Sunny hesitated for a long time, then sighed and summoned Weaver's mask. Soon, a fearsome mask of polished blackwood appeared in his left hand, identical to the one he was holding in his right. Anank's eyes widened slightly. My lord. Is that? He nodded. Yes. Ah. Before you start assuming things, I am not a priest of the nightmare spell, nor am I a chosen of the demon of fate. It's just that I found this thing a few years ago in a godforsaken pit of a cursed city. I've been stumbling on various traces of Weaver while traveling the dream realm, so I guess I am curious about him. Or her. Or whatever Weaver was. Sunny considered telling her about Bloodweave and the phalanx of the daemon in question, which he had swallowed in the Ebony Tower, but decided against it. He didn't want to give the old woman a heart attack, or put strange thoughts in her head. Her reverent attitude was already rather uncomfortable. Anank remained silent for a few moments, looking at the mask, and Sunny, with that same reverence. Then, she sighed softly. My lord. Was this memory helpful to you on your journey? He raised an eyebrow. Helpful? Well. I guess it was. It saved my life a few times. But it also almost killed me a few times. In any case, I probably wouldn't be standing here without it. The old woman smiled. Then it was fate that guided you to it, and me to you. By Weaver's grace. Sunny looked at her somberly. He didn't like being reminded of just how helpless he was against fate. Neither did he like the idea of being a marionette for a long-dead daemon. But he couldn't really dispute what Anank had said. First, because it was pointless to argue faith with logic. Second, because he wasn't sure that his logic was sound. Who was to say that the damned demon of fate had not really arranged for various things to happen in the distant future? This is distressing. He let out a heavy sigh, then dismissed his weaver's mask and put the other one on the bench near Anank. You shouldn't leave it lying on the deck. It is a gift from your mother, after all. The old woman gently took the wooden mask and placed it on her lap. Thank you, my lord. You are wise. Sunny furtively glanced at her and hid a smile. Ha! I got one, too. Then, he looked at the beautiful vista of the great river and said, So, when your elders entered the tomb of Ariel, most of the priesthood of the nightmare spell remained outside, splintered in order to convert more carriers during the Doom War. Anank simply nodded. Yes. She seemed down, so Sunny suddenly wanted to encourage her. He thought for a few moments, and then shrugged. Well, they've done a great job. The nightmare spell outlived both the demons and the gods. In the future, it is nearly all-powerful. By the way. You said that it was very alluring to people even at the start. But what about the price? Weren't they afraid of dying in the nightmares? The old woman looked at him with a hint of confusion. Nightmares, my lord. What do you mean? Why would people be afraid of dying in their dreams? At that moment, Nephi's opened her eyes and turned her head, looking at Anank silently. Sunny turned, too, his gaze becoming sharp. Does she not know what a nightmare is? He lingered for a moment, then asked, Did the spell not put people through trials, way back then? Anank touched her white hair, then shook her head. Trials? No. I've never heard of anything like that. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Now, that's new. Why would nightmares only exist in our time? That doesn't make any sense. Nephi seemed to share his thoughts. She remained silent for a moment, then suddenly leaned forward and asked, Grandmother. I have a question, then. Where exactly does the nightmare in the nightmare spell come from? Sunny blinked. What a strange question. The old woman stared at them in bewilderment. After a while, she said, That is what Weaver named it. The demon of fate must have had a reason, but it is not for us to know what that reason was. The nightmare spell. It is just what it has always been called. Sunny and Nephi's glanced at each other. The spell was always very particular with its words, and Weaver must have been the same. There was no way that the grand creation of the nebulous daemon had been named without much thought. But what was the meaning of that name? Neither of them knew, and Anank didn't seem to know either. Damn Weaver. Chapter 1298, Noble Cause. Sunny left the old woman alone and returned to where Nephi's was resting, full of thought. He had not received all the answers he wanted from Anank, but at the same time, he learned a lot. Maybe even too much. I don't know. There was too much information, all of it fragmented, ambiguous, and confusing. Not only that, but he was not even sure that it could be trusted. In any case, many mysteries he had never hoped to solve were resolved now. Like the destruction of the Forgotten Shore, it had become collateral damage in the war between the demons and the gods. Or the identity of the nameless prisoner of the ruined cathedral, it was one of the first 2 apostles chosen by Weaver to tend to and spread the nightmare spell. Whoever these apostles had been. Sunny even had more context for why the followers of War God had been destroying the temples of Shadow God in his first nightmare, and what Empire Oro of the Nine was a soldier of. Still, he had even more questions now. Like always. My head hurts. He was saying these words a lot in this nightmare. Sunny sighed, then looked at Nephi's. What do you think? With how obsessed she was with destroying the spell, the revelations about its origin and presumed purpose had to have shaken her. And maybe even her conviction. But Nephi simply shrugged. Makes sense. He raised an eyebrow. Huh. She looked at him and remained silent for a moment. That the nightmare spell has a purpose, and that its purpose is tied somehow to the destruction of the dream realm. However, that doesn't change anything. Sunny leaned back and studied her calm face. She seemed as composed as ever. So, knowing that doesn't change anything for you. Nephi's looked at the sky. Why would it? It is still hateful. It is still the cause of indescribable misery. That of countless people, and my own. Salvation. Future? To me, it sounds like the spell was designed to destroy countless futures for the sake of a future that Weaver envisioned, and fuel it with the lives of those like us, who have never asked to be a part of Weaver's schemes. Sunny frowned, then glanced at the frail figure of Anank. Luckily, it didn't seem like she had heard them. Nephi's gritted her teeth. If a burglar comes into your home, kills your family, and takes everything you have from you, does it really matter if the burglar intends to use the spoils for a noble cause? Would you hate him less? Sunny sighed. He could see her point, too. I guess it depends. Nephi's looked at him darkly. Depends. On what? He lingered for a few moments, collecting his thoughts. On the nature of the relationship between the dream realm and our world. How separate are they, exactly? Would corruption have spread to the waking world eventually, even without the spell, or not? Things like that. Sorry. I seem to have lost track of the metaphor. She stared at him for a while, then turned away with a scowl. Sunny winced. His argument was reasonable. But humans weren't. That included him, as well. If someone murdered Rain to save an entire neighborhood, he would have hated them all the same. He did not say anything else, looking somberly at the great river. Eventually, it was Nephi's who broke the silence. Her voice was even. I am curious about something else, though. Sunny glanced at her and raised an eyebrow. What? She frowned slightly. What happened after Anank's elders entered the tomb of Ariel and lost contact with the outside world? How did the war escalate even further? What could have happened to cause both sides to be destroyed? Neff's eyes glinted with white radiance. And what role did the spell play in the conclusion of the war? How has it grown to its current state? Sunny felt a sudden chill as he remembered the description of Bone Weave. Despised and hunted by both sides, Weaver disappeared. No one knew where Weaver went and what they did. Until it was too late. With white light burning in her eyes, Nephi's looked at him and asked, "Did you ever think that, maybe, the nightmare spell is not only responsible for the devastation of our world, but also for the destruction of the dream realm?" He remained silent for a while, his expression troubled. Then, Sunny rolled his eyes. "Damn it, Neff. You do remember what flaw I have, right? Please don't subject me to avalanches of questions like that. To answer all of them. I don't know, I have no idea, I have no clue, there's no way to tell." Nephi's blinked a couple of times, then opened her eyes wide and covered her mouth with a hand. Oh. Sorry. Sunny continued nonchalantly, that is a mystery to me, who knows? And yes, I did consider it before. There, all done. In the awkward silence that followed, he smiled and said, anyway. All this talking made me hungry. Let's eat. Sunny felt spoiled eating Anang's home-cooked food, so much so that the weight he had lost on the dark island was slowly returning. The old woman herself still ate like a bird, but she seemed to be in a better state than before. Her hands were shaking less, and she remained lucid for longer periods of time before having to rest. The ketch continued to move downstream, devouring distance with great speed. Nothing had attacked them yet, perhaps because they had left the most dangerous region of the great river, perhaps because Anang knew how to navigate the flowing waters to avoid danger. It was probably both. The day came to an end, followed by a peaceful night. Sunny spent most of that time quietly working on mastering the fourth step of Shadow Dance. The dire enlightenment he had gained in the battle against the Azure Serpent was steadily leading him to success. In the morning, they enjoyed a scrumptious breakfast, and then nothing changed. The journey continued, and the waters of the great river remained the same. The old ketch continued to travel into the past.